There's nothing like a hoppy wobbly pop to finish off the day. This is one of the most relaxing beverages enjoyed by many. Beer. Hops being its main ingredient that activates the bitters and also helps stabilize it for a long shelf life. Now, hops is not just about beer, so today I want to share with you a bit more about this plant, some of its medicinal uses, and how it kind of got going in this whole beer revolution. Nowadays, we have all these artisanal brews, and it all started with this magical little plant. So let's dive deep into hops. Things like anxiety and tension. Also, we might see with lower back pain, I mentioned earlier. So before we talk about the benefits, let's get to know hops a little better and some of the history around how this became one of the most infamous ingredients of our time. Well, first off, as you can see, hops is a vine. It grows really easily up and along. It's one of these binding vines that wraps around other plants. It was actually considered a ditchweed in Europe, very common, very easy to grow and cultivate. It is related to the cannabis plant. It's in the Cannabinaceae family, which is kind of ironic because these are two of those kind of slightly mind-altering plants that have this ability to relax our body and deal with pain. Inside of these papery veils of the hops flower is all of this resinous yellow sacs. You see that yellow resin? In the fall, like it is now, the early fall, these become more papery and they produce this resin. That is when the hops is harvested. And that resin is much of the smell you get from hops, much of the bitter compounds, and much of the sedative compounds and analgesic, and many of the active compounds are really found in that resin. Now, when we harvest it, we're gonna just use these papery flowers. Supposedly, how you dry it out makes a big difference. And one of the interesting things about New World hops is it's become this artisanal thing where we have different methods of growing it, different methods of drying it, different strains, and just like cannabis, it's become this really interesting plant that has all these cultivars, so to speak. So depending on how you dry this plant, the hops flowers, you get a different amount of sedative quality or more of those active resins. So the slower you dry it, the better it is for things like insomnia. The faster you dry it, the better it is for digestive upset and digestive juices, and I guess stimulating the digestion. So anyway, this plant became famous because it really was a rebellion against the Roman Catholic Church. Traditionally, it was a gruit, was a mixture of herbs that was used to brew beer. And the point of using herbs to brew beer was one for their effects, their mind-altering effects, but also to preserve the alcohol. And you have to remember that back then, beer was predominantly used versus water as a beverage because water was often polluted and made people sick, and brewed beer actually helped keep scurvy away and helped keep bacterial infection away. So kids drank beer, adults drank beer. It was crazy times. Anyway, the gruit mixture was proprietarily the Roman Catholic Church's, let's say, trademark, and nobody else had the recipe really. It was a bunch of German brewers, Protestants supposedly, who rebelled against this and were like, no, we're gonna use hops. And it came to be that hops was actually much more relaxing and sedative. So at first there was a concern around, is this gonna relax people? Because the old herbal cultivars that grew this found that some of the workers would actually fall asleep while picking hops because it is that sedative quality. But it turns out with the estrogenic qualities, the relaxing qualities of this plant, it actually was a really good beverage for relieving sore muscles and sore tension at the end of the day. And the bitter compounds really had a certain flavor to them that became kind of addictive in a way. And as a rebellion, hops became the major herb in brewing beer. In fact, it even got passed into law, I think it was 1516, where hops got passed into law as being the primary ingredient to brew true beer. Anyway, there's some of the origin of hops. It's gone through a number of iterations since. This beverage, beer anyway, is just one way in which hops is used, probably the most prominent way it's used today, but that's not all it can be used for. There is so much health benefits. There's also a lot of health benefits to just drinking a beer. Although caution to the wise. I've found this out for myself. More than one beer can be a wobbly pop and can actually alter our consciousness in a big way. And I'm sure you know this already. Hence why people drink beer, right? It's not just to relax the body, but it's also to alter the mind. Anyway, this plant is a very stimulating digestive. Bitters stimulate digestion, really good for liver and actually helping stimulate gallbladder and to balance out fats. So here's hops, one of these great digestives, except for in excess, it becomes an anti-digestive. So when you drink 3-4 beers, it actually makes it hard on the digestive system to digest. So here's one that drinking half a beer after a meal is actually really good for digestion. But a little more, well, you know the rest of the story. Anyway, that's kind of one of its main first claim to fame. The other thing to think about with hops is that it is relaxing, right? It relaxes the system. So many of its benefits come from this relaxing, sedative quality. This is a neuroanalgesic, so it helps to numb nerve pain. Well, it helps to numb emotional pain too. If you've ever had a beer to wipe away the sorrows, this is the kind of thing that hops is known for. But it's not just sedative to our emotional pain, our digestive pain, our pain like that. And actually we can use it as a poultice for sore lower back pain and these kind of things. It's also really useful for sedating the body in general, to calm us down from overwhelm. So one of the #1 herbs for anxiety, one of the best herbs anyway, for adding to blends, it does have valerianic acid, which is something we find in valerian, and so it can be used instead of valerian. One of the challenges with valerian is some people find that that herb gives them a valerian hangover. Now I know what you're thinking, hops has a hangover too, in case you haven't drank a few beers before. But yeah, it can be more relaxing and a useful herb instead of valerian. So the oleoresins in the flowers of hops are also really good for anxiety and tension and worry and restlessness. This could be even useful for twitches and people who are overly excited. The big thing is that it can calm down the nervous system, right? Have a de-escalating effect on the nervous system. Often in this world, we get ahead of ourselves, and hops might be one of those plants that can really help calm us down. For this reason, it's also really useful for insomnia. And this was one of the original herbs used for insomnia with dream pillows. You can make little pillows, put them under your bed, and help have lucid dreaming, but also to relax the mind. Also, hops was used in a bath that same way. You can put the hops flowers in the bath, or if that doesn't work for you, maybe a couple of beers or maybe a hops tincture is a good way to go. I've made tea with this, but tincture is really the best way to go, other than crafting it up in an artisanal beer. This is one of those herbs that is really good for people who have overwhelm, tension, that anxiety and insomnia, like I mentioned, for helping to combat overthinking, monkey mind, I like to think of it as. And so in a way, hops is a perfect herb for our time. Despite beer having its own challenges and its own karma, the relaxing of the mind and calming down the nervous system is what a lot of us need to de-escalate our bodies in our minds in that way. Another benefit of hops is that it's actually quite antimicrobial and antibacterial. This is a herb that can be useful for pain, but also for bacterial infection. So it's something that is used commonly, or was used anyway, for toothache. This would be a great opportunity. Hops jammed in the mouth. Now it's quite bitter, but it can be really useful for toothache, as well as middle ear infection. A liquid extract has been made of hops and poured into the ear for an ear infection. We'll also see that it's another herb we might add to a formula for bronchitis or whooping cough, or more like this. So hops is not only bacterial, but is also good for pain, making it a really great herb for these kind of conditions. Because of those oleoresins, this is much better extracted in fat or in alcohol than it would be in water. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about hops. What are some of the other benefits? I will say that as a digestive, I mentioned that already, this increases gastric juices. It can also be really useful for a nervous tummy. So if we're having anxiety and we have this like tense tummy, I've often seen hops to be a really useful one for that, to help calm down the digestive tract. We'll also see that this is one that is good for nervous pain, like I mentioned. So nervous pain is really around like sharp pain, and Classically, it's something that would be used for, say, women going through menstrual cramps, right? Hops as a tincture or as a tea can be used as a nice way for sharp, throbbing or piercing menstrual cramps in that sense, to help as a bit of a uterine tonic, but also to work with the nervous pain of that. Also, we might see with lower back pain. I mentioned earlier, you could put it as a poultice on the back. You can make a nice hot brew of hops. Take a cloth and dip it in the hot brew, put it on the back for lower back pain. We also might see that that could be used for arthritic pain or for any kind of other types of pain in the body. So this is hops. It's one of those plants, there's so much more to share about, but I'm gonna leave it here with just know that here's a herb that you can work with as a medicine. I highly recommend that you make it as a tincture if you wanna use it medicinally, or you put it in your bath or a dream pillow. The challenge with the dream pillow is that smell is strong and it's slightly intoxicating. When I smell hops, I'm like, oh, I actually love this smell. It's got this really unique bouquet that you don't see a lot in the herbal world. You can tell there's some potency to this plant, but some people might find that overly strong. So if that's the case, drink it in a beer, put it in a tincture, have it in a bath or something. But if not, make it into a dream pillow, sleep with this plant, get to know it. I would highly recommend, if you do drink beer, grow this plant. It's super easy. You don't necessarily have to use it in your beer or make your own beverages. We've used straight up hops in some of the crafting and brewing I've made. I've made a number of hopped meads as well as hopped kombuchas, and that's really fun too. So it's another great way to work with this plant. But all in all, it's one of those plants, again, in the cannabis family, it's a bit of a master plant that produces really unique chemistry that can have a overall beneficial effect on the body, and it's just one that is well worth knowing for your herbal repertoire. So this hops is in the perfect timing for harvesting. It is late summer, early fall. These buds have all the little resin in them. This is what we're looking for its medicinal benefits. And again, I want to mention that hops is one of these herbs that we don't want to do too much. If we do too much hops, it has the reverse effect. So when I say a beer is good for you, but 2 or 3 is not, this is true. We've seen a lot of issues around people drinking too much beer, but I will say that here's a herb that can be really useful for the overwhelm, for the anxiety, and is ideally used as a tincture and just a really great herb to add to other herbs for nervine support. When it comes to anxiety, tension, nervous system overwhelm, overload, all these kinds of things, insomnia, we might want to add this to things like skullcap, passion flower, or valerian. We may want to also include things like blue vervain and other herbs like that. All right, so here's some hops. Let's get to it. Hop, hop, hop and away! Well, cheers, my friends. I hope you learned a bit about hops today. This is one of those plants that has a rich history. It's actually useful for so many things. So I'm just happy to be able to celebrate and give a little more attention to this plant for its medicinal benefits and for some of the ways in which we can start to use it. All right, I'm gonna go back to reading my book on clinical herbalism and all the exciting stuff it has to offer. Cheers.